I've noticed with a lot of guys when they make their portfolio, they like modelling guns and they fill their portfolio full of guns, and that's fine, you know, but it doesn't show much of a range for an art director to look at. So yeah, my number one piece of advice would be don't overstuff your portfolio full of ordinary work. If you've got 10 pieces of work and only 2 of them are good work, and the rest of them are okay, but not as good as those 2, I would stick to just sending those 2 as opposed to the 10. Because you've got to remember too, these people are really short on time. They don't have all day to sit there and look at your portfolio. They're only going to allot, you know, like 10 minutes to look at anyone's work, if that. So the fewer pieces they have to look at, the more likely you are to get them to actually pay attention to what they're looking at. And they're less likely to discard your work because they've seen 5 pieces of your portfolio that are pretty ordinary. You've got these 2 great pieces, but you've got these other 5 that are really, they're okay, but then, they're probably always going to remember the worst piece of work that they see as opposed to the best, if you know what I mean. If they're looking at 7 pictures, say, 2 of them are great, 5 of them are pretty ordinary, they're going to remember the ordinary ones. They're not going to remember the great ones. So if you just send them the 2 great ones and discard the ordinary ones, they're going to remember you more, and they're going to pay more attention to your submission because they've only got so much time, and they're going to have more time to look at just those 2 pieces. I'm not saying you should only send 2 pieces in your portfolio. I'm just saying, as an example, try and choose the best of your work, and don't send too many. You don't want to go sending, even if you've got 20 pieces of really great work, don't send 20 images. It's too much for them to look at. They're not going to have the time to look at them all, or if they do, they're just going to really quickly go through them. They're not going to really analyze them very much. So yeah, don't send them too much work, and try and send them only the best work. And try and add a bit of variety. Don't send them all guns or all cars. It's great that you can model a gun really well, and it's great you can model a car really well. But when you're working for a studio, you know, they're not going to hire you to model just guns. They're not going to hire you to model just cars. Not usually, anyway. You're going to be working on a whole different type of 3D objects. You may work on guns and you may work on cars, but you're going to have to work on other stuff as well. And if you can show them that you can already produce work in other areas apart from guns and cars, you're going to be more valuable to them as an employee. They're going to see that, we'll take a chance on this guy because he's shown me he can do cars, he's shown me he can do guns, and he's shown me he can do whatever else, statues or, I don't know, buildings or any, more variety, that's all. So yeah, just as a quick tip to you guys putting your portfolios together, try and vary it up a bit. I know from the studio we see a lot of one type of thing. I'm not picking on people that do guns. I'm not picking on people that do cars. Those 2 things have to be modelled in a game studio as well, if you're particularly game studios. So I'm not saying don't do them. I'm just saying just don't stuff your portfolio full of just that. That's all. And you may find if you do something else, model something else, you'll be just as it'll be just as interesting and just as much fun as doing a car or a gun. I'm just going to try and work out if we can assign this material here. Just before I do this assign, I'm going to do a save here on my file. Because remember, I've turned off autosave, and I must remember to do these manually. So we'll increment it. And again, when I do my save files here, you see this one is called R11. I'm going to increment this now to R12. I just incrementally save manually this way. And this allows me, if I change something that I find later on, I want to go back to the old version. I've got it already stored on my hard drive. Let's assign this texture now. Okay, and that's fixed up our color problem with the banister here being a different color to the railing. We're going to do the same for this one here on the end. We can close our material editor. Now I do want to add a bit of weathering and wearing to these railing sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the top railing to the base runner here. Before I can do that, I've got to detach the base runner because I don't want to change that texture that runs along the very bottom there, those circles. I quite like that. That texture is fine. We're going to continue using those. But I do want to add a little bit more interest, I think, to the railings. Like I want to add some wearing and weathering like we see in on this one. When we took it into Substance Painter, we added all this wearing to the edges and weathering to the wood. I think we should do that as well for the for these other banister sections. So again, to keep everything nice and consistent, and it just adds more interest to the texture to add that wearing and weathering, as opposed to just this straight color here that we see where there's no wearing or weathering or anything. And the color here is a little bit off too. This is the old texture. We're going to replace it with the cherry wood, which is more red. So let's detach the top runner here from that section. Okay. You'll see here that the back of my model is open. It's not a closed model, and that's just to save some polygons. I wouldn't really worry about it. When I made this for UDK, poly counts were really important. So removing parts of the model where you're never going to see them, like these actually intersect with the wall. So the wall sort of hits it around here. So you never actually see the back of the model here, which is why I removed the polys from that inside loop. Just to save on polygon counts. But like I said, now with the new engine, the new graphics cards, that's less of a problem. If it was a lot of polygons, you'd still remove them, but 1-2 tries there is not going to be too much of an issue. I won't add them now because there's no point, but that's the reason they're not there, and that's the reason that because this part of the geometry will intersect the wall around here, will actually physically be into the wall when we remake this in Unreal. Let's detach that bottom runner. Let's do the same with this one over here. And the one at the front. Okay. Now we're going to add the top railings to the bottom runners. And remember, again, I'm going to keep this as one piece of geometry, so I'm going to make sure I'm in edit poly mode here though, not edit mesh. We'll start by attaching the top and the bottom. The top and the bottom. It doesn't matter the order you go in. I'm just doing it this way for consistency. You can attach all the bottom and then all the top. It really makes no difference. Not at this stage. No problems, Rage. Thanks for popping into chat and saying hi. And I will consider that YouTube request for some information about working in the industry. You have a good night's sleep, dude. So we have our top railing and our runner sections here attached as one piece of geometry. So the first thing we have to do before we do anything else is we have to UV map this so that we can take it into Substance Painter. And the best way to do that now would be to throw down and unwrap UVW. I'm getting confused because I've reinstalled all my software after updating to the Creators Update of Windows, and I haven't set up my modifier keys, so I have to do that. We may do that now. It's a good way for me to show you guys, if you do want to do this yourself, how it's done. Some people may not know if they're a Max user. I mean, they should, but they may not. You can configure your modifier sets here. So basically that little button here on the end, your modifier sets is your modifier list here. And I like to add shortcuts to these as buttons, and in Max you can do that by going and configuring your modifier set. Let's add a few more buttons here by upping the number. What do we got? I like to go through it bit by bit here and drag in what I generally like to use. I always have a bend in there. Occasionally I'll do a bevel. Cap holes is always good to have. Extrude I use a lot. Lathe is also a good one to have. Mesh smooth can be useful. I generally have Pro Optimizer on there. That's an optimization for geometry in Max. Let's add a few more buttons here. Quantify Mesh is really useful now. That's a new one in Max 2016 I think they may have added that. To quantify your mesh automatically. Tessellate can be useful. Let's add some more buttons. Twist can be useful as well. An STL check can also be really useful. That'll check your model for any errors. Let's add a couple more buttons though. Now UVW map is always useful. I'm just going through and adding the useful ones, the ones that I find useful. Feel free to add any of the others that you think you use. Unwrap UVW is completely, always a necessity, always used. That's probably about it. That'll do for now. So now we have them all readily available here in our stack. So I'm going to throw down an unwrap UVW, open my editor, and again this is a new install of Max, so everything is like default, and I like to make my unwrap window here a bit larger. And then you can go in and you can save current settings as default, which means every time you add that unwrap it'll open at this size in this position in Max. There is a bug in Max 2016 where if you copy that UV unwrap to another piece of geometry it forgets about this positioning, but if you add a new one it'll always open like it is now. So I'm going to save the current layout to default. Let's select all of our UVs here and we'll do a flatten mapping and see what that gets us. Let's try a box mapping. Hey for Volt, it's good, thank you. How are you? Hope you had a great Easter. Like I said, I'm back from my break in the woods, my cabin in the woods with no technology over Easter, which was a nice break for me. But I'm very well, I hope you are. I hope you had a good Easter. Didn't eat too much. Not too much chocolate, guys. Not good for you. I'm just going to move my UVs down a little bit. I'm just squaring these off a little bit more. The unwrap did it at an angle, which is probably correct, but not what I want. So the Volt says too many starbursts. But they're so good. I get that. But no, I was good. I didn't eat too much chocolate or anything like that. Not too many Easter eggs. It was more just to get back out into the woods and away from technology and take a relaxing break. We're going to keep it as a box map, I think, for these pieces. Yeah, I think a box map here is probably going to be better. I'm just checking what it's doing. Actually, I may have to change what I've just said. A box map is probably not going to work for us because if you look at what it's doing here in the viewport, I've selected that part of the geometry and it's selecting a box map is mapping from the top and either side and the bottom. Mapping from the top like that, it's getting an overlap here between the lower piece and the upper piece. That won't work well for us when we're doing a 3D paint in Substance or any 3D paint program. Remember, if you're doing a 3D paint program, you really don't want to have overlapping UVs. So you can get away with a box mapping occasionally, and we still may be able to do it. Let's do it this way. Say we want to use a box mapping, but we don't want to overlap our UVs like that. What we can do is it's going to remove that unwrap from the top, go into sub-object mode. I'm going to select the top pieces. I'm going to not attach them or anything. I'm going to throw down an unwrap on that. We'll open our editor. Now we'll do another box mapping. Alright, we're just going to move that out of the way for a moment, out of the 0 to 1 UV space. And we're going to collapse our stack. Okay, now we're going to select the bottom runners. Do the same thing, do an unwrap UVW. Open our editor, select our UVs. Actually, I want to make sure I resave that now. And that's because I want to make sure that that's enabled by default, select by element. So now we're going to do another normal mapping. We'll do a box mapping again. And we're going to move that just outside the 0 to 1. And collapse our stack. Okay, now we're going to throw down an unwrap on everything. Open up our editor. And now we have our UVs mapped to box, but they're not overlapping. They're much easier for us to move around and use. So I'm going to just make some adjustments here. I want to just straighten these up a bit. I don't want those. I do want those. Alright. I'm going to do the same on this side. I'm just straightening these edges up a little. Not vitally important, it just helps in the UV mapping, in the texture painting a little bit, to have them a little bit neater. I'll do the same thing here with these ones. And these ones here. And these ones here. Alright. Oh, and these ones here. Okay. Let's make sure that they're in the 0 to 1 UV space now though. So we're going to do is scale them in a bit because we have to fit 2 UV pieces in here. Well, no, it doesn't matter if they're perfectly straight because you're using, it would matter if you're doing your texture painting by hand in, say, Photoshop, or if you're using a pattern and doing it in Photoshop. But because we're doing it in Substance Painter, it's less of a problem. Substance Painter will take care of actually making sure our texture is mapped correctly to the to the geometry. But if you're doing it in Photoshop, it's more important then because it's easier to work if it's in a straight line, a completely straight line. There really was no reason for me to actually move them at all because we're using Substance Painter. Or if I was using Mari, it wouldn't be required either. Just make sure they're not overlapping. The UVs aren't overlapping for a 3D paint program. But if you're using Photoshop where you're doing it by hand, you're going to make it'll make your life much easier if they are straight when you're working that way in Photoshop. But if you're using Substance Painter, it's not so much of a problem. We wouldn't have needed to really move them at all. I only moved them to make it look a bit neater in my UV layout here. But it's more important if you're texturing in Photoshop by hand. Yeah, if you're using Photoshop, says it's because he uses Photoshop since he's new at this. Yeah, if you're using Photoshop, I would suggest you make sure that they're straight. It'll just make texturing in Photoshop easier for you, as opposed to if it was on a bit of an angle like it was originally. You can still do it in Photoshop that way, but it'll make your life much easier if it's straight. That way you can do a rotation in Photoshop and get a nice straight edge and that type of thing. So yeah, working in Photoshop, straighten them up. Working in a 3D paint program like Mari or Substance Painter, less important, but still nice to keep your UVs nice and nice looking anyway by straightening them up a bit. And important if you're using a texture that you're going to be tiling. So say you're not going to be painting your texture in Photoshop, but you're going to be using a tiling texture in whatever 3D program you're using. In that instance, it's important as well because if the UVs aren't at an angle, if they're at an angle, your tile is going to look off. So you can think of that like if you throw a checker pattern down on whatever it is you're UV mapping, which is a good way to check your UVs. If the UV maps are at an angle, your checkers are going to be skewed. So you want to make sure it's not at an angle if you're using a tiling texture in your model. And you're just going to find it easier in Photoshop if it's straight. Now I'm just positioning my pieces here so I can take maximum advantage of my texture space 0 to 1 without going outside. But I want to try and avoid UV mapping one piece of geometry like this too large as compared to the rest of them, because otherwise that piece will look higher resolution on the model as opposed to the other pieces. So it's important to keep your UV maps scaling consistent. So don't go, say, choosing one piece like that and making it take up half of your UV space here and put everything else down the bottom. Otherwise, you're going to get an odd-looking model texture in your model. The top part will look high resolution and the bottom part will look all blurry and low resolution. You're going to try and keep them all consistent, the same size type thing. Just keep that in mind when you're moving your UVs around or scaling them. Let's move a couple of these pieces up. It makes no difference where they are in the UV space here. Not at this stage because we haven't textured it yet. You wouldn't want to do this once you've textured it because you're going to change your texture map. Let's move these ones up as well. And now I'm going to move some of these inside here because there's free texture space in the middle. Let's grab these ones and actually let's move these little texture pieces over here. Move this one, or these two pieces up a little bit more. Now we can grab these and move them up. We'll move this one up. Move these ones up. Now, what we can do is move that up to there, select all of our UVs and move them around to the middle. And now we can scale them all uniformly, so we're not scaling any out of any bigger than the others. Again, you're going to make sure that they don't go outside of that 0 to 1 space, so they have to stay inside that square. You can't have any of them outside of that square. And that should be good for what we want to do in Substance Painter. So we've UV mapped our railings and our runners. Just before we take that into Substance Painter and paint that cherry wood texture in, I'm just going to take a quick break for a few minutes, guys. I want to grab a fresh cup of coffee. I will be back in just a few minutes. I will leave you with my Be Right Back screen. Kanan17, thank you for following the channel. I do appreciate it, guys, when you follow me on my Twitch channel. So thank you very much. I'll be back in just a few minutes, guys. I'm going to grab a fresh coffee. I'll leave you with my Be Right Back screen, and I'll see you in just a couple of minutes. Okay. So, before we take this into Substance Painter, I think what I'll do is, just for the benefit of anyone that may be new watching the channel, I'll play this video. This is a video of the building that I created back. We're creating this building in the new Unreal Engine. This is one I made back in 2011 using UDK. And we'll fast forward past this concept art. I know a lot of you guys that are regulars have probably seen this video now 1,000 times, but just for the benefit of anyone new, this is the building we're recreating in Unreal Engine 4 now. This was done in UDK in 2011. We're updating the assets before we take them in. I'm changing the textures on a couple of the assets, and I'm making some of the assets a little higher polygon. Again, I'm just keeping an eye on my OBS here to make sure that everything is running correctly after the creators update to Windows. So we're going to be recreating this building in the Unreal Engine 4. That's that square piece that we were referring to before. And I'm doing this basically so I can see the changes, the improvements that Epic have made to the Unreal Engine's lighting from when I did it back in 2011. And also this building is just sitting on a checkerboard floor. We're going to be actually create a small environment for it so that we have some animated plants and stuff happening outside. Thank you for Bolt. He says beautiful building. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. We may make a few changes here and there as we rebuild it in the Unreal Engine. We're going to stick to the same basic, decoration, but we'll change up some of the plants and change up a couple of the assets, maybe add some different assets as well as we rebuild it. I'm just waiting for it to get to the part to show you the asset we're working on at the moment, which is at the back of the building here. There's a railing section above this piece here. Once it swings around, it swings back a bit. Okay, can't really see it, but we're working on the railing that's going around the top of this part of the model here. There's like this balcony that sits out of the back of the second floor. We're working on the railing for that at the moment. I don't think we're not going to see it again. So let's that's this piece here, but we want to change the texture on these the railings and the runners to better match the cherry wood we're using here for this square section in the middle, and to add some weathering to it as well to make it more interesting. So with those pieces selected, let's export those, I think. So we've unwrapped them, making sure I've done everything I should before I do my export. I'm actually going to throw down a reset X form on it. That's just to make sure that my axis is positioned correctly. I'm going to collapse my stack now. Now we can do an export. Before we export it, let's call it, what do we call this one? and what will I call it? I'll call it Mez for mezzanine rail. Okay, let's export this now as an FBX file. I just realized my FBX file will have defaulted back to normal because I've reinstalled Max, so let's make sure we put it in the right spot to begin with. UE4 projects, models, Art Deco building, exports. And again, I like to create a new folder for everything to make sure it all stays nice and organized. We'll call it Mezrail. Mezrail FBX, we'll save that and we'll check our settings here because like I said, it's defaulted back because it's a new install. What we want to make sure that Turbo Smooth is turned on, Triangulate is turned on, and Preserve Edge Orientation is turned on. I'm going to edit and save my preset here, and we're going to call this one, I'm going to call it Painter 2 UE4. And that way I can just select that now if Max ever defaults back, and I'll know that my settings are selected correctly. So they're really the only three you need here. I'm just going to check the others actually. There's no animation, so that's not a problem. Under my advanced objects, I'm going to make sure that my units are set to centimeters. My Y is up for Unreal. And the FBX format here, I always like to save in Max when you export as FBX. You can choose the version of FBX you want to save as. They let you go all the way back to 2006 and all the way up to 2016, which is the version of Max I'm using. I always like to save as version 2013. And I do that just so it allows the maximum compatibility between different programs. Some software won't accept the very latest version of FBX. And to get around any problems, I always like to save as 2013. That way I can be sure that any of the software that I use, like SAP I use to convert 3D models, for instance, any other 3D program I use or null to bring my model in, I know that it'll be compatible with 2013. It may be compatible with later versions, but just as for safety's sake, I always like to choose 2013 version. So we've done that, we've done that. Okay, let's save our model. Let's jump into Substance Painter. Create a new project. Let's select the FBX file we just exported. Mezrail, that one just there. I'm using the Unreal Engine 4 Algorithmics template here. Alright, now you see there's a problem here. The model is actually turned inside out. It looks like it's see-through. That's incorrect. So what we're going to do is jump back into Max, and that's a problem with the normals. Actually, and that's another one that I forgot to add here. So I'm just going to jump back into my modifier sets here. I'm going to add another 2. Jump down to the bottom. Because I use the normal modifier quite a lot, I always like to add that as a default here, as a button. I'm just going to find it. Just there. And let's see what we can put on the last button here. Max has a lot of modifiers because the program's been around for decades now, so over the years Autodesk have added quite a lot of modifiers to the program. It's one of the strengths of using 3D Studio Max. You have this modifier stack, so you can always go back if you don't like something, a change you've made, so that's very useful, and all of the modifiers they include are really useful as well. And again, Max is used a lot in ArchViz work because it has a lot of things built into it that were created for ArchViz, like creating window sills, window frames, stairways, that type of thing. That was all built into Max because it's always been used a lot in ArchViz. So game studios will use 3D Studio Max. They'll also use Maya. Maya is generally used more by animators in a game studio because the animation in Maya is better than Max if you're an animator. Yeah, come on, I'm just going to choose one more for my last button. We'll throw down and edit normals. That can be really useful as well sometimes. But what we want here is we want to throw down the normal modifier. We want to unify our normals as well. So I'm flipping my normals and unifying them. Let's just re-export that piece of geometry again. Yes, we want to override it. I just want to save this again as painted to UE4. Yes, I want to overwrite that because we made those changes to the units in the version of FBX, so I just want to update my preset here. Alright. Now we'll jump back into... No, we don't want gnarled. Wrong button. Back into Painter. I'm going to edit my project and reload that mesh now. And now our normals are the right way around. Alright, so by default, I'm just going to pull this up so I don't get confused as to what's going on. Again, so I reinstalled all of my software, so as I'm working here now, because I'm using it for the first time after coming back from my break, got to make sure I've positioned everything the right way, or where I want it, the way it was. And again, I don't recommend, the reason I reinstalled the operating system fresh Windows 10 Creators Update is because it's a major version of the operating system. And if you're doing an update on a major version, like, you know how Windows went from the normal Windows 10 to the Anniversary Update Edition, and now they've released the Creators Update Edition. It's always better with those major updates to do a clean install. Now I know it's a pain to actually have to reinstall all of your software because a clean install is going to wipe your operating system back to the way it was fresh, and you're going to have to reinstall all of your software again, which is what I chose to do with the Creators Update because it's a major update to Windows 10. If you do an update from the old version of Windows 10, through Windows Update to update it to the new version, you can have problems with drivers, particularly graphics card drivers, particularly NVIDIA graphics card drivers. Because I use an NVIDIA GTX 1080 in this machine, doing an update as opposed to a clean install, you can really cause problems for NVIDIA drivers, and a lot of people will find that they'll have problems like they'll boot to black screens when they reboot their computer, or the container for the NVIDIA driver will start crashing all the time in their event viewer. Those problems are usually caused by an update of the operating system when you should have done a clean install. Like I said, I know it's painful having to reinstall all of your software. Believe me, having to reinstall 20 programs or whatever is painful. But it's the best way to go if you want to avoid any problems with your operating system and your graphics card drivers and that type of thing. Do a clean install or reinstall your operating system. Now, once you've done your clean install, back up that clean install before you reinstall the software, and that way, if you ever need to go back, you can quite easily. But if you're coming from an older version of Windows 10 and it's a major update like the Creators Edition, I'd always advise to do a clean install and reinstall your software. That's just my advice. I found that's the most stable way to do it. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with the operating system. That's only for these major updates though, like the anniversary update and now the creators update for Windows 10. If you're not using Windows 10 and using Windows 7, which is still a great operating system, you don't have that problem. So let's start by throwing down we're going to start by throwing down a wood beech honey. This is going to be the underlying wood texture here. So I'm just going to drag that into my stack. And I'm going to delete this blank layer that Substance creates automatically. Move layer. There we go. This wood honey is going to be our underlying texture. Once we start adding some wearing to the cherry wood, this is a wood that'll show up underneath. But I just want to make some adjustments to the settings here. So I'm going to start by turning off my height information.